Our next communication subject matter we're going to discuss is active listening. You know, in today's world, we can connect with people ultra fast through phones, the internet, Twitter, email, Instagram. But the one thing that's very difficult about hearing is it takes time, and you have to be deliberate and slow when you hear, and you cannot rush your active listening. So let's take a look at active listening and see how important it is and how we can build relationships through active listening. Active listening actually helps us gain insight into what the other person is thinking. The Harvard Business Review rated the ability to communicate the most important factor in making an executive promotable, or making anyone promotable, that part, is their communication skills. They ranked it more important than ambition, education, and hard work. That's how important active listening is. We derive 55% of a message from the speaker's facial expressions, 38% from how they actually say the message, and only 7% from the actual words spoken. When somebody speaks, they actually speak at a rate of 125 to 250 words per minute. But we think at 1,000 to 3,000 words per minute. See how fast we think, and how when we're thinking so fast, we can derail ourselves from the act of listening. For many reasons. We start to finish what the person's thinking. They start to tell us something, and before you know it, we're off on a different thought, and we lose where we're at in the active listening process. Less than 2% of people have actually had any formal education in active listening. And images that go into our long-term memory stay, whereas words live in our short-term memory. So what we see, we remember. But what we hear only goes into our short-term memory, and we can lose that very quickly. And in fact, most people only retain about 10% of what they hear. Active listening can improve your retention rate. When we actively listen, let's look at the things that we remember as humans. These are things that we can remember when we actively listen. The first thing that we remember is the most recent thing that we heard. We remember best what we heard last. The next thing that we remember is something that we hear often, the most often, something that we hear frequent. Maybe you hear a jingle on a commercial, or somebody has a tagline, or somebody keeps repeating the same thing over. Maybe a coach keeps repeating something over. They have a mantra. That's frequency. And we come to learn what that person's saying through frequency. But many times we don't get to hear the same thing over and over when somebody's talking to us. Next thing that we remember very well is something that's impactful, something that has drama to it. We remember most the things that are presented dramatically, because we could picture ourselves being in a situation that somebody's telling us using drama if it's a good scenario, and we feel fear if we find ourselves in a situation or the person's telling us about a situation that's very dramatic that we may not want to be in. So if somebody's speaking from a dramatical standpoint, we also remember that very good. And of course, the last thing that we remember when we hear is the application. We remember most the things that we have a use for, because that's what's most important to us. The things that are most important to us is what we're going to hear the most, and that's considered application. Now, here's some things that cause us to forget, or reasons why we forget what we hear. Let's take a look at them. First, we forget 50% of what we hear immediately. So if we talk to somebody for 2 or 3 minutes, we immediately lose 50% of what that person told us. Now, we forget 75% of what we hear within 2 months. And of the 25% that we remember, only 60% of that 25% we remember correctly. And many times we'll say things as we're trying to recall what we said, and they were wrong. The other person may have never said the things that we're passing along. Not necessarily passing along maliciously, but as they receive that message, they're getting the wrong message because it's hard to remember what people say. Remember, one of the things that we do is if we can paint an image in somebody's mind as we're speaking to them, now we have a better chance of putting that into their memory. Okay? When we engage in active listening, we're actively working to understand what the other party is trying to convey. And there's a responsibility to active listening. We actually have to take responsibility for understanding the message and what the other person's trying to convey to us. Now, I'd like to share some suggestions with you to help you become a better active listener. Maybe some skills that you can work on. First thing that we want to do when somebody's talking to us so that we can actively listen is we want to look at the person who is speaking. We want to listen for ideas and themes, not just the facts. And of course, we want to resist distractions. Many times, what we might have to do is ask the person to go somewhere where we can speak, where it's quiet, where we can get the right environment. Sometimes you're just not prepared to speak or to listen at the time a person wants to speak to you. So you have to be able to, sometimes you might have to resist distractions by saying, can we pick a time to sit down and meet? Because this obviously is very important to you. So let's pick a time and a place where we can sit down and we can have a conversation and I can actively listen to what you're telling me. Because obviously what you're saying is very important. Next, the next technique that we have to use in active listening is we have to work at it. Active listening is very hard. It's the hardest of all the communication methods. But to be good at it, we have to work at it. And it's just like lifting weights. It's muscle memory. And it's building that muscle, that active listening muscle. So we have to work at it to be good at it. Next, we have to exhibit an active body state. Many times if we're standing like this or like this, the person that's talking sees that we're closed off. Where if we have our hands to our side and open just slightly, now the person senses that we're open to what they're saying. And when they sense that open body state, there's a connection that starts to happen between the speaker and the listener. And last but not least, take notes. It's a good idea to have a notepad with you and start to take notes. Because when you do that, now you're gaining accuracy to what you're hearing. There's more integrity in the conversation because there's now a record of it. It's written down. So now the other person is going to be more accurate in what they're saying also. Once there's a record and you start to write it down, it gains new importance. It's magical. It's a magical process. And if you feel that you may be insulting the listener or the speaker when you're listening, just ask the person, would it be okay with you if I took notes? Because this is very important and I'd like to take notes so that I can refer to them and make sure that I'm hearing everything you're saying. The next thing that we want to consider, or a few more suggestions that we want to consider, is when the other person is speaking to us, we want to pause for a couple seconds. And the reason we would pause is to make sure that the speaker is done talking. Maybe they're collecting their thoughts. Maybe they have to think for a minute about what they're going to say next. Maybe they're giving you just a couple seconds to comprehend what they said. Maybe they're hitting an exclamation point or a period. And so we have to pause. And that's one of the biggest pieces of the active listening puzzle is to pause for just a second or so to give the speaker time to collect his thoughts. Next thing we want to do is question the speaker for clarification and paraphrase and restate what we thought you heard. So in other words, Joe, let me get this right. What you're telling me is the air conditioning in the whole building, this whole office building, goes down every afternoon about 2:30, 3 o'clock. And what you're telling me is it affects everybody. you're getting a lot of complaints, and if you don't fix it, you fear that you could lose your job. And so I understand what you're telling me. I understand how important it is that we get the air conditioning fixed. And I understand how frustrated and scared you must be. Am I understanding what you're telling me, Joe? And then that way the speaker will say, yes, you do, or he'll correct you, potentially on some of the facts or how he's feeling or the meaning of what he's saying. So what we want to do is pause to make sure the person's done speaking, and we want to question for clarification and then paraphrase what we thought we heard. We have to remember one thing. We all have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we need to use them in proportion. Again, the effective communicator is the communicator that listens more than they speak. The next thing I'd like to talk about with active listening is now we're going to show how comprehensive it is. Many times when we're listening, what we're good at hearing are the facts. But there's actually 3 things that we listen for when somebody's speaking to us. The first thing that we listen for are the facts. The second thing that we're actually listening for is the feelings, how that person feels. And last but not least, the meaning of what they're saying. Many times we can listen to somebody and hear the facts, but not know how they feel or what they actually mean by what they're saying. Let's take a look at this a little bit further. When we listen, again, some statistics here, most people, their communication distribution, when somebody's talking to you, 60% of their communication is their body language. They're telling you what they want you to know through their body language. 30% of what they're telling you comes from their inflection, how they say it. Only 10% of what somebody tells you comes from their words. So the biggest piece is the body language. And so one of the things that we have to understand is we have to look at people. We have to understand how they feel and look at their body language and listen to their voice inflection. Again, going back to the 3 things that we listen for, facts, feelings, and meanings, let's look at facts for just a minute. The facts usually are the part that the listeners hear the most. Unfortunately, the facts generally turn out to be the smallest piece of what the person is telling you. Because what we actually need to hear to be an effective listener is their feelings. And that comes from empathy. And so what we have to do is understand what empathy is. And if we show empathy, we're actually acknowledging the other person's feelings. I understand how you feel. You must be frustrated. You must be scared. You must be tired. You must be worried. Okay? You must be really excited. Boy, you must be really happy. Okay? That's what people are telling us the most, is their feelings. And to gain that good relationship with other people, it's to understand how they feel. See, when we show empathy, we put ourselves in the other person's shoes, and we see things from the other person's perspective. We have the same frame of reference, and we make it possible to communicate and solve the other person's problem. Also, when we use empathy, coupled with our active listening skills, is that we want to feel what the other person is expressing. We want to feel it. We want to feel the temperature of the conversation. We want to get exactly how they feel. And once the other person realizes that we understand how they feel, that's when we start to make a connection. That's when we start to build a relationship with a customer. And that's when they are most ready to have you address their situation. Okay, and last but not least, we talked about facts, feelings. Let's look at the last piece of the active listening puzzle, which is the meaning of what people are saying. See, we often hear what the other person said, but we often don't know what they meant. And many times we walk away from somebody scratching our head saying, what did they mean by that? The person talking may actually deliver a message jokingly. They may use sarcasm. They may use arrogance or be very arrogant, which is going to affect the meaning of what they're trying to say. And so a lot of times we'll walk away as the listener and say, I heard what they said, I understand what they feel, but I'm not quite sure what they mean. And so many times we have to clarify what the speaker's saying by asking them, okay, I understand the air conditioning isn't working. I understand you're frustrated. I need to get the meaning. What do you mean by what you just said? What I mean is, if you can't get this fixed, I have to get someone else to fix it. I understand. Thank you. Okay? So it's our job to not just get the facts and the feelings, but we have to get the meaning. Active listening is so comprehensive. Many times when we use active listening, what transpires is people start to feel appreciated. And active listening will show the customer that you appreciate them, you respect them, and you understand them. And so again, as you can see, active listening is not easy. We can connect with a lot of people very quickly, but the true connection comes from active listening. And when we take the time to actively listen and we practice it, it'll make our life easier, it'll make our job easier, our personal life easier, and it'll help you in your professional life be successful.